The next thing we're going to talk about are JavaScript variables. JavaScript variables. And variables are simply empty units of storage. You can think of them like an empty box that can contain literally anything. You can store anything inside of a variable in JavaScript. You can store anything in a variable in JavaScript. The way we create a variable is we declare it with the keyword var, V-A-R. And following var, we write the name of our variable, such as my variable. You can stop there, just put a semicolon there to end the line, and you will have declared an empty box or an empty unit of storage with the name my variable, which currently is empty. It contains nothing. We can then store something in my variable by calling it by its name and setting it equal to anything we want. Let's set it equal to 100. Okay, so my variable now contains the number 100, or it contains the string 100. Okay, this is declaring a variable, and this is assigning a value to that variable. You can also perform both of these things at the same time. You can both declare it and assign a value to it in the same line of code. Okay, so I did var followed by the name of my new variable made up by me. These names aren't coming from anywhere. I'm choosing these names as I'm declaring these variables. And in the same line, I gave it a value. And it contains a string which reads, "This is a new variable." Okay, two different ways which you can declare a variable and assign it a value. This is much more common because it's a little more concise and can overall make your code a little cleaner. You don't need to feel obliged to declare a variable and assign it a value on separate lines, although there may be some times when you want to declare a variable and keep it empty for a while. So that's something to consider. So I'm going to go ahead and save, reload my page, and we're going to check on these variables in the developer console. This is another thing we'll be doing quite a bit of. Your variables can change throughout your code. You can change them, cause them to change. Or you can change the value that they contain based on user interaction. If a user clicks a button, maybe the variable has a new value, something like that. So sometimes when you're running code and you want to test and make sure everything is doing what it needs to be doing, you'll want to jump into your developer console and check your variables. And you'll do so by calling them by name. So if I type in my variable, the name of the variable which I previously declared and assigned a value of 100, then the console returns to me this 100 contained in a string. And if I call my new var, the console returns to me the string contained inside my new var. This is a new variable. If I try to call a variable I have not declared, then I get an error that tells me another var is not defined. Okay? Let's now write out some variables that include numbers. Let's do var num equals 8 and var num2 equals 12. Save, reload. I'm going to check my variables. Num contains the number 8. Notice that the number is now appearing blue and with no quotes. That indicates a number, as opposed to the 100, which was red and contained in quotes. That was a string. You don't need to memorize the color coding of the Chrome Developer Console. Just react to the different colors that you see here. You're going to learn, you're going to internalize very quickly that this is what a number should look like, and this is what a string should look like. Or this might be a more appropriate example. So we've checked num. Let's check num2. Num2 contains 12. Good. Now I'm going to clear my console by selecting up here, just to give myself some room. I'm going to add num plus num2 and see what happens. What happens is the console actually evaluated this statement. It evaluated what the value of num is, what the value of num2 is, and it added them together and returned that sum, 20. 8 plus 12 equals 20. Okay, and this is how the console can be helpful. You can run basic arithmetic in here. 8 plus 12 returns 20. 8 times 12 returns 96. But it's important to understand that you don't need to only add raw data types like this. You can, in fact, combine the values of your variables. So for a very... this can go very differently if your variables are strings or are different data types. So for example, num plus num2, they're both numbers. So this add sign executes a very familiar function, a very familiar course of operation, which is to add 8 to 12 and arrive at a value of 20. Well, that makes sense. That makes complete sense, right? But let's create another two variables called first name. This is going to be Evan. And then last name. And this is going to be Winston. Save. Reload. I'm going to check my variables. First name, Evan. And last name, Winston. And now I'm going to try to add first name plus last name. What do we think we're going to see? Evan Winston. Well, what it does is actually combine these two strings. It combines the value of first name and the value of last name. They don't have a numeric value, so it's not actual mathematical addition, but they are combined in a process that's called concatenation. And we're going to be performing a lot of concatenation as we work in JavaScript. One thing you might have noticed is that they combined my name as one camel-cased word, one word, no spaces. So that's something that you're going to need to keep track of or be aware of when you are concatenating strings in the future. If I wanted this to read in a way that is comfortable, familiar, and natural for a user, I want that space in there. I want that space between Evan and Winston. So what I would have to do is to concatenate first name with a space followed by last name. And that will concatenate all three of these strings in a manner that is much more comfortable for users or visitors to my site to read. So let's say I wanted to write that to my document. Document.write first name, capital N, plus space, plus last name. And here it says Evan Winston in my HTML document. Okay, so that is concatenation. You always need to remember that the browser doesn't know it needs to add a space between different words. The browser's not going to just reason that out on its own. Computers are very, very literal. So if you do not tell it to include that space, it is not going to include that space. Now, what do you think is going to happen if I write num plus first name? Now we're trying to evaluate a statement that is combining a number with a numeric value with a string. Well, this can throw a lot of students off, but what actually happens is because there is a string in this statement, you cannot add mathematically a numeric value to a string. You just can't. It just doesn't work. It's like comparing apples to oranges. It doesn't work. And so what the browser is going to do is convert one of these variables to the other type. And it's going to be a lot easier for it to convert this number to a string than it is to convert this string to a number. So what we end up getting is 8 Evan. It converts the number to a string and concatenates them, just like it would two strings. Okay, and that's important to remember. Num plus num2, adding two numbers, returns a number. Num plus, let's do last name this time, a number plus a string returns a string. This is important. As we evaluate statements or run statements in JavaScript, we always want to be aware of not only what value is being returned, but what data type is being returned. And that's because there are situations like this where you combine a number and a string and you get something that you didn't expect. In order to keep yourselves aware of what's going on in your code, you always want to be aware of what type of data, number, string, boolean, is being returned by a statement in your JavaScript. Let's take a look at just a couple more statements that we can evaluate in the console. We can do some more math. We can create strings on the fly and add them together. We could actually just write that last one as a full sentence and it will return. But we can create strings on the fly and concatenate them. We can do math. We can also do things like just type in true and see what that returns. It returns true, unsurprisingly. False returns false. But then you get strange things like true plus false, which returns 1. Okay, and there is a reason to that. It's nothing that you need to memorize, nothing that you need to worry about. I'm just trying to drive home that concept. If you are not sure what type of data is being returned by any kind of statement that evaluates to a value, you need to check it in your console. And that is also why the console is our very best friend when working in JavaScript.